Is the truth still out there? We're talking about that this morning because The X-Files is returning for 6 episodes. Sure. And also returning to Morning Live, Canadian author and journalist Bob Mitchell, who, sports writer, crime writer, but you're big into UFO writing now. Yeah. You actually had your own personal experience.
Yeah, my wife and I, about 10 years ago, I mean, I don't know what it was, but I'm sleeping, sound asleep. My wife had worked the night shift, and she's watching TV, and suddenly there's a humming noise she hears, and she looks outside, and there's a hole being punched through the clouds, and everything's being torn up. The garbage cans are flying everywhere, and she comes and wakes me up. And I'm sort of drowsy, I don't know what's going on, yeah. And then she's telling me to look out the window, and I have no recollection of ever looking out the window, but she says I did, and next thing I know, I'm out in the backyard, and all the patio furniture are strolling around. It's like I'm in a mini hurricane, a tornado, and she comes back in and says, there's blue light all over me.
They almost had you, Bob.
Almost, well, and then I come in, and she says, we're talking about it. And I don't remember talking about it, and I go back to bed. And the next morning, I wake up, and in my mind, I'm thinking, was that a dream? And I go out and ask her, did we do all this last night? She said, yeah, we did. So I don't know what it was.
But you have some empathy with these incredible stories. You're now a researcher with MUFON. It's a U.S. group that continues to investigate these this phenomena. So you've had a couple books out. One is Incident at Pleasant Ridge, a Canadian UFO mystery. And your latest intrusion is telling the story of 4 experiencers, as they're called.
Right. Today, people don't like to be called abductees because they're not quite sure whether they've been taken on board or they just experienced something that they can't explain. And these 4 people came to me we had our first meeting in Brantford. And
let's start with Kelly McLean.
Yeah, Kelly McLean, very interesting. She's born in California but had moved here about 40 years ago. And her stuff started right when she was 6 years old.
We have some pictures of her experiences, her recollections.
Yeah, she's 6 years old. She's with her parents, and they're in the wilderness. It's called the Ridge Route in California, north of Los Angeles. And all of a sudden they see a small plane, which they think is a small plane, crashing. And when they go check it out, her father's missing.
Is that the little captain she wrote of?
Oh yeah, when she finally goes out into the woods there, and there's a clearing. She thinks she sees a restaurant with Christmas trees, and she wants to go into it. But when she goes into it, she sees the little captain, and he's that's her drawing. I asked them all to do their drawings to see what they saw. And this little captain is controlling the ship, and there's people in another room where beings like that are working on people, including her father.
And she remembers being irritated as a 6-year-old because the little captain was condescending to her.
Yeah. He asked her to, why aren't you afraid of me? And she didn't know the answer. And then she asked him, well, who are you? And he said, you wouldn't understand. And she was indignant about that because she thought, well, I will understand. I'm a kid, but I understand these things. And
this stayed with her as an adult. Now, in terms of your research, and what kind of process do you go through to try to, for the validity of these things?
Well, that was an interesting thing because when I started writing this book, I thought, am I out to prove them wrong, or I want to hear their stories? I mean, I'm not a psychologist. I'm not an expert on what actually happens to these people. But so I wanted them to tell their story. So I'm a good listener, and for some reason, all the 4 people in this book sought me out, and they just wanted somebody to listen because they had held these secrets to them for 50 years in some cases.
And your takeaway is that you believe they saw something, and
I believe they not only saw something, but experienced something.
Right.
And who are we to say that they didn't experience what they experienced?
You had an interesting one too, Marianne Anderson, a deaf experiencer.
Yeah, that was really strange because in all the research that I did, looking at other people.
Is this from her recollections?
Yeah, this is when she's in a crib. She's in a Toronto orphanage here, and her first recollection is that these beings come and they actually make her deaf because at the time she had she was born premature and she had a lot of problems hearing, and it was so painful that she couldn't take noise. And after they left, she was completely deaf, but the pain went away. And in my research, I'd never found another deaf experiencer that had ever experienced anything like this. But can you imagine you're living in a world of silence your whole life? It's hard enough to tell people, if you're not deaf, what you experienced. Imagine how Like, she held this in for 50 years until I came along and she could tell her story to me.
Well, there's two other interesting stories. Among the four, the takeaway in terms of how it's impacted them and you.
Tremendously for them. Every one of them said that a burden was lifted off their shoulders after talking to me.
They could tell the story.
Yeah, like as I said, they hid these secrets away. And
before we go, though, I mean, in terms of, you know, like we're talking about the X-Files returning, there's huge interest here, even though it's been debunked so many times. And with the advent of smartphones, we had so many sightings, you know, and crappy photos from the 60s. Now we have smartphones, we're not getting any photos.
No, I mean, one of the things that happens with people is when they see something, they don't think about taking their phone out.
That's true. Honey, where's the camera?
Yeah, they're so enthralled by what they're seeing. And I was just saying that in 1947, can you imagine at Roswell if there was smartphones? Somebody would have snapped some pictures and we'd know today exactly what happened.
Well, it's always interesting and a great read, and we'll link up your website. It's available on Amazon, of course. Intrusion from Canadian author Bob Mitchell. Thanks so much, Bob. Good to see you again. We're going to see you again right after this. The truth is out there.